So what is media anyway?
Media?
Media refer to various channels of communication between a person or persons and their intended audience. Television, radio, newspapers, and the internet are different types of media. One of the oldest forms of media is print. Thanks to ever-changing technology, our exposure to media is almost non-stop. Media shapes our perception of what is real. It surrounds us in the forms of billboards, signage, and even the clothes you wear. We have radios, televisions, computers, and smartphones. We have the internet, online video channels, and all sorts of social media. So stop and look around. Media is everywhere, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Plausibly live from the Podcast 99 studios, located in beautiful downtown Manteca, California, this is the Dave Bowman Show. Now, here is your host, the submarine qualified, coffee-swilling, stuffy elitist history buff, Dave Bowman.
Hey, welcome aboard, cheese lovers. It is me, Dave. You want to join me? 565-DAVE is the text machine. It's also the voicemail machine. You can email me, dave@thedavebowmanshow.com, and you can check us out. We're all over the web. Just look for The Dave Bowman Show on Facebook and Twitter. Eloqui conitio. Stand up. Tell those who oppose liberty, don't tread on me. Amongst all the words of the English language, there are several words that I don't like. If you've followed this show for any time, you know I hate the word collaborate. Collaborate is a negative word that has gained a positive meaning in our society today. Today we talk about collaboration as if, whoa, that's a good thing. We should all collaborate together, sing kumbaya. But it's a negative word. It doesn't mean that, or didn't mean that once upon a time. The word provoke is similar but opposite. The word provoke once upon a time, and even to a degree, still has a positive meaning, but has gained a negative connotation in our lexicon today. We don't see provoking as something good these days. We provoke someone to do something bad. We provoke someone to a fight. We provoke someone. But that wasn't what it meant back in the days 1605, when Francis Bacon said, "Liberty of speech inviteth and provoketh liberty," which is a fascinating little statement if you think about it. Provoking liberty. We don't think about liberty in those terms, do we? We think about liberty in the terms of supporting, defending, upholding, teaching, talking about. We don't provoke people to liberty. We don't think about it in those terms. But if you look at the old definition of the word provoke, the obsolete definition, which would have been in place in the time of Francis Bacon and John Milton, and even into the Enlightenment era, of which our Constitution is an ideological child, it meant to summon, to bring forth liberty. So when we provoked liberty, we brought it forth. We made it grow. And when we look at what's going on today, and a lot of talk these days is about originalism and what it means, and who is an originalist and who isn't an originalist, and particularly, what does it mean? And I think I've gone well into depth of this. The idea that originalism means that we want to live in 1787 is laughable, and anybody that tells you that doesn't understand originalism. However, there is an idea here that you go to the original intention. What did they mean when they said this? One of the things that they said, of course, was Congress shall make no law restricting the freedom of the press or freedom of speech. And if we take the idea that to them provoke meant to summon, to bring forth, their logic becomes clear. You don't want to restrict the press because then you're creating problems with provoking liberty, with summoning forth liberty, with guarding, protecting, growing liberty. Becomes a difficult thing to do when you restrict the freedom of the press, correct? All that set up to say, yesterday here in the state of California, our Attorney General announced that we were going to prosecute 2 people over the Planned Parenthood videos. Now, these are videos that you may be familiar with. They're stories a couple of years old, where they went into Planned Parenthood, filmed it secretly, then edited the videos, and then released them to show that Planned Parenthood was conducting abortions. Again, who didn't know that? I'm not sure who didn't know that. But all of a sudden these videos were a hot commodity, particularly on the conservative right, with regards to absolute proof that Planned Parenthood was doing something that we already knew they were doing. Be that as it may, these were considered to be quite a groundswell, a ground-shaking event. They were catastrophic. They were all of this stuff. But almost immediately questions were raised. There were questions about the editing. Anytime a video is edited, of course, you're going to ask, hey, what was cut out? What wasn't cut out? What am I missing here? Every now and then on my video, on the podcast, you'll see a little blurb where it says, coffee break or whatever, or maybe there's a glitch in it. And maybe you know that that's editing, maybe you don't. But do you ever wonder why I had to do that? I mean, what did I cut out of the video? It's a lot easier on audio, folks. It really is. On video, you gotta make it smooth, and it's hard to do. I'm just, kind of learning it. For the record, nothing terrible has happened. Usually it's just I screwed up. I dropped a bad word. I spilled my coffee. Occasionally expelled some gas, whatever. And I really didn't want that on the video. On the tape, like I said, it's very easy to get rid of. But on the video, it's a little harder. But it leaves you to wonder, well, what was there? How long was that gap? Remember Watergate? What happened in that 18 minutes? And was it really just 18 minutes kind of approach to things? So anytime you start editing videos, you start raising questions about the validity of them, unless you can show legally the process by which they were edited. There were additional questions, one of which was the process by which they gained access. They modified driver's licenses, and they essentially lied about who they were. Was this a problem? And even given all of that here in California, the real problem here in California is you can't record people secretly. You have to tell them that you're recording them. And if you don't, that's a violation of California state law. So on the surface of it, you would say, well, there certainly appears to be some validity to the charges here, at least in California. The conservative right immediately responded with, well, this is just a political prosecution. This is a violation of the First Amendment. It's a political prosecution. And I agree. It is a political prosecution. The proof of the fact that it's a political prosecution is in the simple fact that the people who filmed cow farms and dairy farms and chicken farms and the likes of that were not prosecuted at all. Nobody even batted an eye. That's the proof that it's a political prosecution. That doesn't mean that they didn't break the law, but when we live in a world where prosecutorial discretion means that under some presidents, illegal immigration doesn't get prosecuted, why prosecute this here in California? Now, the immediate reaction to that, of course, is the reason we're prosecuting it here in California is because it was Planned Parenthood, and this is an attack by the Christian right on the reproductive rights of women, and we're not going to stand for that, or they're suppressing our free speech. But I think there's something deeper here. I think there really is an undercurrent to this. Again, I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm not an AHT guy. But I think there's something bigger at risk here. In looking at this whole scenario, along with another case that's happening in Texas right now, you have to wonder, is the real reason for this to punish people who secretly videotaped Planned Parenthood admitting that they do abortions, or is it something more nefarious, although perhaps not consciously, I guess is what I'm trying to drive at. Down in Texas a few years ago, and we talked about this extensively on the show at the time, there was a Republican lawmaker who was concerned. And his concern was that too many people were filming police officers in action. So the police would pull somebody over, and apparently in Texas, 10 or 12 people would immediately show up with video cameras or cell phone cameras and start videotaping to see what was going on. That's what we were led to believe what was happening by this particular Republican legislator down in Texas. And so he proposed a law in Texas, which essentially meant that if the substance of the law was that you had to be designated as a journalist in order to film cops in action. If you were not a journalist, you could not film cops in action. So they could walk over there and say, stop that filming right now, turn it off. And they would be legal in the state of Texas to do that, had this law passed. The concern, of course, expressed by the legislator was that, too many people were filming cops and somebody was going to get hurt. Nobody had, and there was no real reason to suspect that anybody would. But he believed that to protect the safety of the public, it was necessary to limit who could film cops in action. Now imagine, if you will, around the country, had that law been in effect, or a law similar to that around the nation, some of the things that would have been different in our country today with regards to police activity not videotaped. Do you see where that could be problematic? The law, of course, died very quickly because, as it turns out, this particular Republican was chastised quite prolifically by people like myself and others who made it clear that we think this law was stupid. We used our First Amendment right to freedom of speech and even a little bit of freedom of press, and that we wrote things to the same effect that this thing was stupid. Newspaper editorials and like that. The law never made it out of committee, as I recall. However, Texas does have a law that defines a primary business purpose, primary business test. In other words, when it comes to civil torts, in other words, liability lawsuits, the state of Texas has a law that says you have to look at the primary business of the people that are involved in it. What is their primary business? And they add to that, they carve out an exception in their lawsuit procedures to allow First Amendment cases to immediately appeal. They don't have to go through the whole process. They just go straight to court and appeal if they believe that their First Amendment rights have been violated. The Texas Supreme Court recently heard a case, the Texas court system heard a case that the Texas Supreme Court refused to hear, that dealt with a couple of groups. The SEIU was one of them, and a local group of plumbers, as I recall, was the other, who were mad at each other because the plumbers wrote something bad about the SEIU on their webpage. The SEIU sued them and asked for a summary judgment of they can't write that. The plumbers' response was, hey, we're media. This is our blog site. This is our news site. We can do this. The court said, no, it's not. Sorry, primary business. You're not media. And the Supreme Court refused to hear this. Now, this is interesting because there was one dissent, and I realize dissent is not judgment, but it's this dissent that is kind of reverberating right now around the country and with what we're talking about. The dissent basically questioned, that is the purpose of the primary business law to determine who publishes something, if they're approved or not, versus what is actually published. In other words, when we look at the First Amendment, when we look at the state constitutions, when we look at the ideas behind freedom of press and freedom of speech, does our law actually limit who can say something rather than what can be said? And in an era when the media, what is the media, is so fluid and so changed, how do we say that this is not a First Amendment issue? How do we say that this is not First Amendment related? And the state Supreme Court said, no, we're not hearing this, and on we've gone. In essence, what has happened is that the state of Texas, that Republican bastion where conservatives are moving left and right because they don't like California, has essentially said, we will say who can publish something. We don't really care what they publish. We're not talking about what they publish, but who can say it is more important to us than what has been said. And when you look at this California case, when you look at this idea, these video makers are being prosecuted now by California. Sure, they're going to be charged with secret recordings and lying on the driver's license, changing their driver's licenses and modifying, government documents. And for what it's worth, I think the evidence is pretty clear that they did that. But is the object here to punish people who have modified driver's licenses in California Is the idea here to punish people who have secretly recorded something here in California? Like chicken cages or dogs, pet farms or whatever. Or is it to chill the idea that someone might do something that we don't like, that we don't approve of, and publish it, and then, and I'm doing the air quote thing here, hide behind the First Amendment and freedom of the press? Do you see why this is a little more unnerving than just two people lying about who they were and secretly videotaping somebody doing something, talking about doing something that we already knew that they were doing? There's a deeper undercurrent here that's really going to become, I think, part of the argument. And I think this Texas case is actually going to end up going back to the Supreme Court to the Texas Supreme Court, based on the reaction down there. It's been pretty interesting to watch. We'll see. But it raises the bigger question about the whole idea of who is media? Am I media? Are you media because you have a blog? If you do a YouTube, are you media? Do you have a credential issued by somebody? I used to have press credentials on a fairly regular basis. You know who issued them? Whatever it was that I was covering. So if I was covering the Amgen race, Amgen would issue me a little card that says, this guy's a journalist, he can come in. If it was the ports, they'd issue me one. There was nothing from the government that said, yes, we approve here, this man you can talk to. Because in essence, that would be, going back to Noam Chomsky's model in his book Manufacturing Consent, which came out in 1988, and led to the rise of the concept of the mainstream media. That control then would be, I think it's step 3 or step 4 of the propaganda model, which is to control access, to control sourcing. But if the government is allowed then to decide who can cover media, who can report media, who can comment on media, is commentary media? All these questions are swirling around here, and they're not as clear-cut as they once were, are they? Particularly in an era when someone can sit down with a video camera, that they bought for, I don't know, how much does a video camera cost? A computer video camera now costs, I don't know, I bought that one like 7 years ago. But what do they cost now? $10, $15? Can you get one? And videotape something that's happening, or video something that's happening. I use anachronistic terms: videotape, audio tape. None of this is on tape. There's no tape involved here. There hasn't been tape involved here in 20 years. But you see the flux that we're in with all of this, and we come back to this idea of who is media, and can the government at any level, city, state, county, state, federal, begin to say who can and who can't publish something, or even cover something, or film something, or whatever? Maybe I'm alone here, but this kind of thing concerns me, because what happens if, okay, these guys are convicted, but the state of California, notorious for being reactionary when things happen that they don't like, the state legislature passes a law that says, well, anybody that reported the tapes, anybody that wasn't a known news outlet or approved news outlet that broadcast the tapes, is also guilty of these crimes. What? Don't say it can't happen. This is California. Believe me, I would bet you lunch today that somewhere in the halls under the Great White Dome up in Sacramento, somebody has at least put that idea forward to someone that, well, we should punish the people that went out that showed them too. Again, controlling access, controlling sourcing. That's part of the propaganda model that Noam Chomsky talked about, that allows the media to be essentially become a tool of manufacturing consent. Whether that's being manufactured by a totalitarian government or the Republic of California or Republic of Texas is really irrelevant. If there is control involved, it's not really media, is it? It's, well, for lack of a better term, propaganda. It is manufactured consent. There's no free speech. There's no ideas here. As John Milton said, the liberty to know, utter, and argue freely according to my conscience. Give me that above all liberties, because if I don't have that, like, really, what can I argue about? What can I discuss? What can I talk about if I don't have that liberty of freedom of speech? The framers, I think, and the founders of this country understood that. And they understood that a media that was free and unfettered would have issues. In fact, they made it clear that it would have issues. It was John Adams who suggested that we needed to prune the less fruitful branches of the media, the ones that were noxious, I believe was his word that he used. And even Thomas Jefferson at one point in his career after he was president would say, you can't believe anything that's in a newspaper. Now, did he really mean that, or was he frustrated? Did they understand that, look, the trade-off of a free media is there's going to be crap we don't like. There's going to be crap that, to borrow from President Clinton, I think it was, who was on the airplane, Rush Limbaugh gets to sit on the radio for 3 hours. I don't get to do that. There's going to be perceived unfairness. But is there really? And if the government can slowly, smoothly, and in a way that seems, as the Texas legislator said, to protect the public, begin to restrict who and what is media and work its way into controlling who the sources are and who can do what and who can show what and who can say what do we have? Do we have a free press? Do we have freedom of speech? Or do we simply have a government that's controlling something? Or a corporation that's controlling something? Chomsky's model, by the way, is that the corporations once upon a time were controlling this. And that has morphed now, particularly in the erroneously named mainstream media, to being the Democrat Party that's controlling it. I don't know. Again, because of the way media has changed, mainstream media today is not newspapers. It's not television network news. Mainstream media today is the internet, social media. And even that raises questions as to, still, what is media? Is media the headline? Is media the post that I make that says, this is outrageous, this is angry, this kind of nonsense should not be happening? Is it the reactions? Is it the headline? Or is it in the actual story that I post? The link that nobody actually reads. Did they read the link or did they read the headlines? Even back in the days of newspapers, we had that happen. People would read the headline, draw a conclusion. They wouldn't actually read the facts involved. There becomes this broad issue of what and who is media. Who is allowed to do this? Which is exactly what this Texas judge is saying. Are we more focused on who is saying something or what was said? Does the impetus for a civil tort, a lawsuit, a financial damage, is it based on the fact that so-and-so said it or what so-and-so said? And the chilling effect that this is going to have on freedom of speech and freedom of press ought to be obvious to everyone. It ought to scare us. It ought to be no question in our mind as to who is media? You're media. I'm media. He's media. She's media. We're all media, particularly in today's world. In today's world, you can sit down at your computer and in less than 5 minutes, I would say probably closer to 3 minutes, you can launch your own website on which you can share your own news, your own opinions, your own information. You can get sources. You can aggregate stuff in. Hell, you can be your own news bureau in about 3 to 5 minutes. Can the government then turn around and say, well, you're not media? We're shutting you down. You don't have the right to present that information. You don't have the right to say those things. And if it can, the bigger question remains, doesn't it? Go all the way back to the beginning. I was talking about that word provoke. to summon, to teach, to, I have the definition right here. Let's just read it. To anger, enrage, exasperate, or vex. That's kind of our modern definition. But listen to this. To stir up, arouse, or call forth. To incite or stimulate. To give rise to or bring about. And of course, an obsolete meaning, to summon. If we make the argument, and if we take the understanding, the originalist understanding, that the purpose of a free press was to provoke liberty, then we have to accept the reality, the axiom, that the purpose of the press is to provoke, promote, encourage, summon, bring forth liberty. And in fact, that's what they've said. That's what Bacon said when he said, liberty of speech inviteth and provoketh liberty. When Milton said, give me the liberty to know, utter and argue freely according to conscience above all liberties. And if we start suppressing opinions, stories, press that we don't like, how do we provoke liberty? What are we actually provoking as opposed to liberty? What are we actually provoking? Tyranny? Totalitarianism? Soft tyrannies? Well, it's for your own good that we don't want you to film cops because somebody might get hurt. Well, somebody might get run over by a bus. Should we stop running buses? He said questioningly. When we sit down, when I do my podcast, when you do your commentaries, when you make your posts on your Facebook page, you have become media. Do you understand that? I don't care if your whole purpose of being on Facebook is so that you can look at pictures of your grandkids or talk to people that you knew 30 years ago. At some point on that, you have expressed an opinion. You have said, well, that sucks, or that's great, or I voted for this person, or you should vote for that person, or we don't support this, we don't support that. And if you've done so, you are media. You have become that chance to argue and utter freely according to your conscience. And in doing so, that has to be protected. And if it's not protected, if it's more concerned with who said it than what was said, well, we don't approve that person saying it, but we do approve this person saying it because they're saying stuff we like, of course. We've run into the wall, and we've run into the danger that the framers feared of a totalitarian state that would control, in Chomsky's model, a propaganda state that would control media and use it to destroy rather than to provoke liberty. I want you to think about it. And I want you to think about it in terms of those cases, particularly here in California. Is our concern that this is a stupid prosecution, or is there something more here running under the surface? What do you think? 565-DAVE or dave@thedavebowmanshow.com. Take the time right now. Tell the people that matter in your life you love them very much. You'd miss them if they weren't there, so don't pass up those opportunities. You don't want to have that regret. Plausibly Live, this is the Dave Bowman Show podcast.
The Dave Bowman Show is a Slippery Fish Entertainment production for the Podcast 99 Network. Copyright 2017. All rights reserved. For more information or to contact the show, log on to www.thedavebowmanshow.com.
Hey, I'm gonna go do something productive. I'm gonna go watch television.